Zelphra Mwangi-Cooke stood at the entrance of the most defeated building she had ever seen and felt something crack open in her chest. The drive-thru car wash her late husband left her had not been operational in 6 years. The roof sagged. The concrete was split. The equipment was gutted and rusting. To the county assessor, it was a liability. To the bank, it was collateral on a debt she could not pay. But Caspian had left her a key taped to the back of a picture frame and a note written in his careful, slanted handwriting. Go to the wash floor. Find the drain cover nearest the back wall. This is where I kept my greatest secret. I kept it for you. Zelphra had not slept since she read those words. And when she finally knelt on that cracked concrete floor and pulled back the drain cover, what she found sealed beneath it would unravel 40 years of silence and save her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Zelphra Mwangi-Cooke turned 67 years old on a Tuesday in March, alone in a house that no longer felt like hers. She made herself a cup of tea she did not finish, sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unopened envelopes, and let the morning pass without ceremony. There was no one to call, no children to check in, no siblings left on either side, just the quiet of a house in Pelwick Hollow, West Virginia, and the weight of everything that had gone wrong in the past 14 months. Caspian had died on a January morning the year before. He had been 71, still sharp, still full of plans, still the kind of man who fixed things around the house before you noticed they were broken. He had complained of fatigue for 2 weeks before the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor delivered the news on a Wednesday. By the following Saturday, Caspian was in hospice. He died 11 days later, and Zelphra had held his hand for every one of those days. They had been married for 43 years. She met him when she was 24 and he was 28. He had been a master locksmith then, running a small but well-regarded shop in Charleston, and she had come in to have a spare key made for her apartment. He had taken 40 minutes to make a key that should have taken 5, asking her questions the whole time, pretending to have trouble with the machine. She figured out what he was doing when he charged her nothing and asked if she wanted to get coffee. She said yes. She never really left after that. They built a life carefully. No windfalls, no shortcuts. Caspian ran the locksmith shop for 15 years before he sold it and bought the drive-thru car wash on Route 9 outside Pelwick Hollow. It was a modest operation for bays, automated equipment, a small office with a space heater and a coffee maker. He ran it well for nearly a decade, long enough for them to pay down a good portion of the mortgage on their house and put a little aside. Then his back gave out. Then the equipment needed replacing. Then a larger car wash franchise opened 6 miles up the road and took most of the business. By 2018, the place was closed. By 2020, it was a wreck. What Zelphra had not known until after Caspian died was how much debt had quietly accumulated behind the scenes. She found out the way a lot of widows find out, through letters that arrived after the funeral. The car wash property carried a lien of $94,000. There was a second mortgage on the house for $47,000, taken out to cover the car wash repairs in 2017. Medical bills from Caspian's final months added another $31,000 on top of that. Combined, the debt was $172,000. Her Social Security check was $1,340 a month. The math was not complicated, and it was not kind. Rowena Ketch, the loan officer at Pelwick Hollow Savings and Trust, had been professional about it. Businesslike. She had laid everything out in clear language during a meeting in February, 2 weeks after the funeral, when Zelphra was still moving through each day as if the air had thickened around her. The bank had been patient so far, Rowena explained, but the accounts were already in default. Without a plan to address the outstanding balances, foreclosure proceedings on both the house and the car wash property would begin within 60 days. Zelphra had nodded and thanked her and driven home and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before she could make herself go inside. She had tried to think practically in the weeks that followed. She called a real estate agent about the car wash property. The woman drove out, walked through the bays, and offered a number that was less than the lien on the property. She called a salvage company about the rusted equipment. They wanted to charge her for removal. She called a lawyer about the medical bills and learned that negotiating them down was possible, but slow, and slow was a luxury she did not have. She was 3 weeks from the start of foreclosure proceedings when she finally went into Caspian's study to sort through his papers. She had been avoiding it. His reading glasses were still on the desk. His handwriting was still on a notepad by the phone. Going in felt like dismantling him, and she was not ready. But she made herself do it. She found the key on the second day of sorting. It was taped to the back of their wedding photo, which had sat on the shelf above his desk for as long as she could remember. The key was small, heavy, made of dark steel, with no manufacturer's mark on it. Behind it, also taped to the back of the frame, was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and read Caspian's handwriting, still as neat and deliberate as the day she had met him. Zelphra, if you found this, then I'm gone and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry I left things complicated. But I did not leave you with nothing. Go to the car wash. Go to the wash floor, bay number 2. Find the drain cover nearest the back wall, the large square one, not the round one. Lift it. Bring a flashlight. What's underneath has been there for a long time, waiting for you. I built it for you. I built it because I always knew I might leave before I was ready, and I could not stand the thought of you having nothing. Open it and you'll understand. The key is for the safe inside. I love you more than you ever fully knew. Caspian. Zelphra read the note 4 times. Then she sat down on the floor of his study, her back against the desk, and cried until she had nothing left. She went to the car wash the next morning. The drive out to Route 9 took 11 minutes. Zelphra had made that drive hundreds of times over the years, usually to bring Caspian lunch or to drop off paperwork or to sit with him in the little office on slow afternoons when neither of them had anywhere else to be. She had not made it since the funeral. She had not been able to. The car wash looked worse in March than it had her memory. The signage had partially fallen, leaving the metal bracket hanging at an angle above the entrance. Weeds had pushed through every crack in the lot. One of the bay doors had buckled inward, and the metal above it was stained dark with rust and water damage. The chain-link fence along the back of the property had come loose from 2 of its posts and sagged into the dead grass behind it. She parked and sat for a moment with the engine running. Caspian had been proud of this place once. She could still see him on the day they opened it, standing at the entrance in his good jacket, shaking hands with people from town, laughing at something their neighbors said. He had worked hard here. He had come home smelling like cleaning solution and motor oil, and he had been happy. Watching it look like this was its own kind of grief, separate from losing him, but connected to it. She turned off the engine and got out. The side door was padlocked, but she had brought the full set of keys from his desk drawer, and the third one she tried turned the lock. The door swung open with a low groan of a hinge that had not moved in a long time. She stepped inside. The interior was dim and cold. What light came and arrived through gaps in the roof and the buckled bay door, falling in pale strips across the concrete. The conveyor track that had once pulled cars through the wash was still there, though the belt had snapped and lay coiled at one end. The brush arms overhead were stripped bare, the nylon bristles long since removed or rotted away. Water stains ran down every wall. Bay 2 was in the middle. She walked to it, her footsteps loud in the empty space, and stood looking at the floor. The concrete was cracked and discolored, the way all the bays were. But she could see what Caspian meant. There were 2 drain covers near the back wall. One round, one square. The square one was larger, easily 2 feet across, set into the floor with its edges flush to the concrete. It did not look remarkable. It looked exactly like every other drain cover she had ever ignored. She crouched and turned on her flashlight. The cover had 4 recessed bolts holding it in place. Whoever had installed it had made sure it would not move casually. She found a socket wrench in a rusted toolbox near the wall, tried 3 different heads before finding one that fit, and spent 20 minutes on her knees on that cold concrete working each bolt loose. Her hands ached by the time the last one came free. She lifted the cover. It was heavier than she expected, maybe 30 pounds, and she had to use both hands and shift her weight back to get it up. Beneath, it was a shaft, roughly 2 feet square, dropping about 3 feet into the ground. At the bottom of the shaft was a steel door, flat, set into the floor of the shaft, with a single keyhole at its center. Zelphra sat back on her heels and stared at it. Caspian had built a vault beneath the car wash floor. She almost laughed. It was such a Caspian thing to do. He had been a locksmith. He had spent 15 years understanding how things were secured, how locks worked, what made something truly safe. Of course, if he was going to hide something, he would not put it in a drawer or under a floorboard. He would engineer a proper solution. He would think about it the way he thought about everything, methodically, thoroughly, with a clear idea of what failure would look like and a plan to prevent it. She took the dark steel key from her coat pocket. It fit the keyhole exactly. She turned it, heard a heavy mechanical click from inside the door, and felt the steel panel shift slightly under its own counterbalance. She pulled the recessed handle, and the door swung upward on a well-maintained hinge. Not rusted, not stiff. The hinge had been oiled. He had been out here recently. Even near the end, somehow, he had been out here. Inside the vault was a steel safe, a serious one, the kind she had seen in bank offices, roughly the size of a large suitcase. It sat in a lined enclosure that had been built specifically to hold it, the walls around it packed with a gray foam material that had kept out moisture. On top of the safe was a large envelope with her name on it. Caspian's handwriting. Same careful, deliberate letters. She reached in and took the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She did not open it there, kneeling on a cold concrete floor in an empty car wash. She sat with it pressed against her chest for a moment, the way you hold something before you're ready to know what it is. Then she took a breath and opened it. The envelope contained 2 things. The first was a letter for pages front and back, written in Caspian's hand. The second was a smaller sealed envelope with the words, "Read this after you've spoken to someone you trust," written across the front. She set the smaller envelope aside and began reading the letter. "Zelphra, my love, my whole life. I need you to understand something before I explain what's in the safe. I need you to understand why I kept this from you, because I know you, and I know your first instinct will be to feel hurt that I had a secret. Please don't. I kept this secret because keeping it was the only way it would work. If you had known, we would have used it. We would have opened it during the bad years, the years when money was tight and the car wash was struggling, and we lay awake at night running numbers in our heads. I kept it sealed because sealed was the only way it stayed whole. Sealed was the only way it could save you. Here is what you need to know. When I sold the locksmith shop in Charleston in 1998, I told you we made $140,000 on the sale. We made $187,000. The difference, $47,000, I set aside without telling you. I put into things I understood. Not the stock market, not funds or accounts. Things I could hold, things I could study, things I could lock in a vault and know were safe. I spent the next 22 years adding to it whenever I could. $50 here, $200 there. Every time I fixed a neighbor's lock after hours, every time I did a side job I didn't mention, that money went into this. I need you to open the safe now. The combination is the day we met, the month, then the day, then the last 2 digits of the year. You remember. You always remember dates better than I did. Zelphra lowered the letter and looked at the safe. She remembered the date. May 9th, 1981. She entered 05, then 09, then 81. The safe clicked and the door swung open. What she saw inside did not look like money. Not at first. What she saw were rows of small cardboard boxes, each one labeled in Caspian's handwriting, each one sealed with tape. Beside the boxes were 2 cloth pouches, drawstring closed, and a thin binder with a rubber band around it. And at the very front of the safe, sitting on top of everything else, was a single folded note. Don't panic. Read the binder first. She picked up the binder. The rubber band snapped when she removed it, old and brittle. Inside were pages of notes, organized by date going back to 2001. At the top of the first page, Caspian had written a heading in capital letters. What this is and what it's worth. She read, the boxes contained rare coins. Not random coins, not a hobbyist casual collection. Caspian had spent 22 years acquiring specific pieces. Pre-1933 American gold coins, a category she had never heard of, which he had researched and tracked with the same methodical patience he applied to everything. The binder documented each purchase: date, source, price paid, condition grade, and a column on the right side where he had tracked estimated current value at 5-year intervals. She turned to the last page of the binder. He had updated it 8 months before he died. The final column showed a combined estimated value of $1.1 million. Zelphra sat on the floor of the car wash with the binder in her lap and read that number 3 times. She opened one of the cardboard boxes. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a coin. It was smaller than she expected, golden, worn but not damaged, with a woman's profile on one side and an eagle on the other. It looked old. It looked like something from another century, which she realized it was. She picked up the letter again and found her place. Pre-1933 gold coins were taken out of circulation by the government. They were never reissued. The supply is fixed and shrinking. That means every year that passes, the ones in good condition become rarer and more valuable. I bought carefully. I bought things I could document, things with clear histories. The binder has everything. Every coin, every source, every receipt. Don't let anyone tell you the documentation doesn't matter. It matters enormously. It's the difference between what a dealer will offer you on the street and what a serious buyer will pay at auction. I know what you're facing. I know about the debts. I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive because you would have wanted to use it too soon, before it had grown into what it needed to be. But now it's ready. Now it's yours. The cloth pouches contain 2 coins I set aside separately. Open them last. They're the most valuable pieces I found. I want you to see everything else first, so you understand what I built before you see what it became. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Zelphra set the letter down carefully on the concrete beside her. She reached into the safe and picked up one of the cloth pouches. It was heavier than she expected. She loosened the drawstring and turned it over in her palm. A coin slid out, larger than the others, thicker, with a depth of color that caught even the poor light of the car wash. She turned it over. On one side was a standing figure, a woman in robes holding a torch and an olive branch, with the date 1907 below her feet. On the other side was an eagle in flight. She had no idea what she was holding, but the way Caspian had written about it, the way he had sealed it separately and told her to save it for last, she understood that it mattered, that it was the piece everything else had been building toward. She put it carefully back in the pouch and closed the safe. She needed help. She needed someone who understood what these coins were, what they were actually worth, and how to sell them without getting robbed in the process. She was 67 years old, alone, in debt, and sitting on what might be a fortune. She was also, she realized, sitting exactly where Caspian had always wanted her to be. Not comfortable, not settled, but not finished either. She picked up the smaller sealed envelope from the floor beside her. The one he had labeled "Read this after you've spoken to someone you trust." She put it in her coat pocket. Then she closed the vault, replaced the drain cover, and walked back out into the March cold to figure out who she was going to call. Zelphra drove home with the binder on the passenger seat and both cloth pouches in her coat pocket. She did not turn on the radio. She did not stop for gas, even though the gauge was low. She drove straight home, locked the door behind her, and sat at the kitchen table with everything laid out in front of her. She needed someone she trusted. Caspian's letter had been clear about that. The smaller sealed envelope was not to be opened until she had spoken to that person. She turned the envelope over in her hands, looking at his handwriting, and thought about who that was. Celestine Hubbard had been her neighbor for 22 years. She lived 4 houses down in a green clapboard house with a vegetable garden that took up half her yard and a front porch where she spent most of her evenings regardless of the season. She was 71, sharp, practical, and had a way of cutting through a complicated situation to the part that actually mattered. She had brought food every day for the first 2 weeks after Caspian died without being asked and without making a production of it. She had simply shown up. Zelphra called her. Celestine arrived within 10 minutes, still in her gardening clothes, and listened without interrupting while Zelphra laid out everything. The key, the note, the drive out to Route 9, the drain cover, the vault, the binder, the coins. When Zelphra finished, Celestine picked up the binder, put on her reading glasses, and spent several minutes going through it page by page. Pre-1933 gold coins, Celestine said, without looking up. My late brother collected coins for 30 years. Nothing like this, but he talked about these. Said they were the kind of things serious collectors spent lifetimes chasing. Do you know anyone who could tell me what I actually have? Celestine set the binder down and looked at her over the top of her glasses. I know someone who might know someone. Let me make a call. She stepped out onto the porch. Zelphra sat at the table and looked at the 2 cloth pouches and thought about Caspian measuring out $50 here and $200 there across 22 years, building something in secret while they lay awake worrying about equipment costs and franchise competition and quarterly losses. She thought about all the evenings he had come home from the car wash and said nothing about where else he had been, what else he had been doing. She had never questioned it. In 43 years of marriage, she had never had reason to. Celestine came back inside. My nephew Fumiko Drayle. He's based in Nashville. Certified numismatist, which means he appraises rare coins professionally. He also consults for auction houses on high-value collections. He says pre-1933 gold is absolutely his area, and he could be here by Thursday. That's 2 days. That's 2 days, Celestine agreed. Can you wait 2 days? Zelphra looked at the binder. I've already waited 14 months without knowing this existed. I can wait 2 more days. She almost made it. The following morning, a black SUV pulled into her driveway at 9:15. She did not recognize the vehicle. The man who got out was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad across the shoulders, wearing a jacket that cost more than her monthly Social Security check. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into something that communicated money and impatience in equal measure. A second man followed him out of the passenger side, shorter, carrying a clipboard, with the specific energy of someone paid to agree with everything the first man said. The first man knocked on her door. Mrs. Mwangi-Cooke? My name is Broderick Vanth. I'm a commercial property developer based out of Huntington. I believe you own the car wash property on Route 9. Zelphra kept her hand on the door frame. I do. How did you know that? Property records are public, he said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. My associate Quillen Fester and I have been looking at several distressed commercial properties in the county. Yours came up. We'd like to make you an offer. I haven't listed it for sale. You don't need to list something for someone to want it. He said it like it was a compliment. May we come in? She did not move from the doorway. What kind of offer? Broderick glanced at Quillen, who made a show of consulting his clipboard. Based on our assessment of the property's current condition and the outstanding lien, we think $55,000 is a fair number. Cash, fast close, we handle all the paperwork, and you walk away clean. Zelphra looked at him. The lien on the property alone was $94,000. He was offering her $55,000 for a property with a debt that exceeded his offer by nearly $40,000, meaning she would close the deal, hand over the property, and still owe the bank money. That would leave me in debt, she said. It would reduce your debt, Broderick said smoothly, and eliminate the carrying costs of a property that's losing value every month. Sometimes taking a loss now prevents a bigger loss later. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. Calm, reasonable, faintly sympathetic. I'll think about it, Zelphra said. Don't think too long. He handed her a business card. Properties in default move quickly. You want to be the one making the decision, not the bank. She closed the door. She stood in her hallway holding his card and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not panic, something colder and quieter than either of those things. She had dealt with enough difficult situations in 67 years to recognize when someone was counting on her not knowing something. Broderick Vanth had driven an hour from Huntington to offer her less than her debt on a property he clearly wanted. That meant the property was worth more than he was saying. And if the property was worth more than he was saying, then whatever was beneath its floor was worth more than she had even begun to imagine. She put his card in the kitchen drawer and called Celestine. Tell Fumiko to come tomorrow, she said. Not Thursday. Tomorrow. Fumiko Drayle arrived the next morning in a sensible gray sedan, carrying 2 hard-sided cases and a leather satchel. He was in his early 40s, compact and unhurried, with close-cropped hair and the kind of calm that came from spending years around things that required patience and precision. He shook Zelphra's hand at the door and thanked her for having him on short notice. Celestine made coffee while Zelphra brought out the binder, the cardboard boxes, and the 2 cloth pouches. She had carried everything home from the car wash the previous day and stored it in the locked cabinet in Caspian's study. She set it all on the kitchen table and stood back. Fumiko did not reach for anything immediately. He looked at the layout first, the way a doctor looks at a patient before touching anything, taking in the full picture. Then he picked up the binder and began reading. He was quiet for a long time. Zelphra and Celestine sat across from him and waited. Outside, the wind had picked up and was pushing dead leaves across the front yard in slow circles. "Your husband kept extraordinary records," Fumiko said finally, without looking up. "He was a locksmith for 15 years before the car wash," Zelphra said. "He was methodical about everything." "It shows." Fumiko turned another page. "He was also a careful buyer. Every piece he documented here is from a recognized category of pre-1933 American gold coinage. St. Gaudens double eagles, Liberty head eagles, Indian head quarter eagles. These are not random coins. He targeted specific dates, specific mint marks, specific condition grades. This was not a hobby. This was a considered long-term acquisition strategy." He set the binder down and picked up one of the cardboard boxes. He opened it slowly, removed the cloth-wrapped coin inside, and unfolded the cloth on the table. He took a loupe from his satchel, a small jeweler's magnifying glass, and examined the coin under the kitchen light for almost 2 minutes without speaking. "MS-62, he said quietly. "Maybe MS-63. I want a second opinion on the grade, but the surfaces are clean. No cleaning, no damage. Original skin." He set it down and opened the next box. He worked through every box methodically. Each coin came out, got examined under the loupe, got a quiet comment or a numerical grade, and went back into its cloth. He filled 2 pages of his own notepad with figures. Zelphra watched his face the whole time, looking for a reaction that would tell her something, but his expression stayed level and professional. Then he reached for the cloth pouches. He opened the first one and tipped the coin into his palm. He looked at it without the loupe first, just held it in the light and turned it slowly. Then he reached for the loupe. He was quiet for a long time. "Mrs. Mwangi-Cooke," he said, "do you know what this is?" "A 1907 something. I saw the date when I opened it at the car wash. This is a 1907 St. Gaudens double eagle, high relief, wire rim. It's one of the rarest coins in American numismatic history. The United States Mint struck fewer than 20 of them in this specific configuration before they changed the design. Most are in museums or major institutional collections." He set it down on the cloth with great care. "This one is in exceptional condition. I would estimate MS-64, possibly MS-65. A coin like this sold at auction 3 years ago for $1.9 million. The kitchen went completely silent. Celestine put her coffee cup down. Zelphra felt the room shift slightly, the way it had in the car wash when she first opened the vault, that sensation of the floor becoming less certain beneath her feet. "1 coin, she said. "1 coin, Fumiko confirmed. He reached for the second pouch. "May I?" She nodded. He opened it and examined the second coin. This one was slightly larger, with a different design, a standing liberty on one side and a walking eagle on the other. He spent 4 minutes with the loupe before he set it down. 1915 St. Gaudens double eagle, also high relief. Also exceptional condition. Not as rare as the first, but significant. Auction value in current market, somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000, depending on the grade confirmation and who's in the room on the day. Zelphra pressed both hands flat on the table. "What's the total?" she asked. "Everything. The whole collection." Fumiko went back to his notepad and spent several minutes adding figures, cross-referencing with the binder, making small adjustments. Celestine refilled his coffee without being asked. He thanked her without looking up. Finally, he set his pen down. I want to be clear that these are estimates pending formal grading by a certified third-party service, which I would strongly recommend before any sale. Grades affect value significantly, and you want documentation you can take to auction. He paused. But based on what I'm looking at and based on current market comparables, I believe this collection has a conservative auction estimate of $2.4 million. With the right buyer in the room on the right day, it could reach $2.8 million. Zelphra looked at Celestine. Celestine looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Caspian, Zelphra said finally, to no one in particular. Just his name. Just his name out loud in the kitchen where he had sat every morning for 43 years, because she did not have any other words for what she was feeling, and his name was the only one that fit. Fumiko left that afternoon with photographs of every coin and a signed agreement to arrange formal third-party grading through a certified numismatic service in Nashville. He would have results within 10 days. In the meantime, he gave Zelphra a single piece of advice before he got into his gray sedan and backed out of the driveway. Don't tell anyone what you have. Not neighbors, not relatives, not the bank. The moment word gets out that there's a significant collection involved, you will have people coming at you from every direction, and not all of them will be honest about what they want. Zelphra thanked him and went back inside. She lasted 4 days before Broderick Vanth came back. He arrived on a Friday afternoon, again unannounced, again with Quillenfester in tow. This time Quillen was carrying a folder instead of a clipboard, which felt like an escalation. Broderick was dressed the same way as before, same expensive jacket, same rehearsed smile, but there was something different in his manner. Less patient, more certain of himself, the way people get when they think they already know how a conversation is going to end. Zelphra opened the door, but did not step back to let them in. Mrs. Mwangi-Cooke, I wanted to follow up on our conversation earlier this week. Have you had a chance to think about our offer? I have, she said. Good, because Quillen has put together a revised assessment of the property. Broderick nodded at his associate, who opened the folder and produced a single sheet of paper. Given the structural deterioration of the building and the environmental assessment we had done on the lot, we've actually had to revise our offer downward. We're now looking at $40,000. Zelphra looked at the paper without taking it. Your offer went down. The environmental assessment flagged potential drainage issues on the property. That creates liability. We're still willing to take it on, but the risk has to be reflected in the price. She looked at him. He had sent someone to assess the drainage on her property without her permission. The drain cover in Bay 2 was the only drainage feature significant enough to warrant that kind of attention. She did not know what they had found or how much they had seen, but the fact that they had been out there on her property without asking told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man Broderick Vanth was. Get off my property, she said. Broderick's smile thinned. Mrs. Mwangi-Cooke, I understand you're in a difficult position, but I want to be direct with you. The foreclosure clock is running. Once the bank moves forward, you lose any ability to negotiate. You lose the property and whatever's on it. Our offer, even at $40,000, puts cash in your hand before that happens. You had someone on my property without my permission, Zelphra said. That's trespassing. And your offer, at any number, is something I'm not interested in. I won't tell you again to leave. Something shifted in Broderick's expression. The rehearsed pleasantness dropped away, and what was underneath, it was not particularly pleasant at all. You're making a mistake, he said. Whatever you think you have in there is not going to be as simple as you're imagining. These things never are. Goodbye, Mr. Vanth. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway and listened to them get back into the SUV and drive away. Then she called Celestine, who called Fumiko, who gave her the name of a lawyer in Charleston who specialized in estate assets and had experience with high-value collection sales. His name was Aldrich Vane. She called him that same afternoon. Aldrich Vane was in his early 60s, unhurried on the phone, and asked good questions. He listened to the full situation without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The trespassing is worth documenting, he said. Write down the date, the time, what he said about the environmental assessment. If he accessed the building without permission, that's a separate issue. Do you have any evidence they were inside? The drain cover in Bay 2 was disturbed when I went back yesterday to check on things. I had replaced it carefully after I removed the safe's contents. It had been moved. Another pause. Document that too. Take photographs. I'll draft a cease and desist letter to Vantha's company today. That should slow him down. He paused again. Mrs. Mwangi-Cooke, how quickly can your coin specialist have a formal grading completed? He said 10 days from Tuesday. Then we have a timeline. Once you have certified grades and a formal appraisal, we can move quickly. There are 2 auction houses I work with regularly that handle rare American coinage at this level. Either one could have your collection in front of serious buyers within 6 weeks. He paused. How are you holding up? It was such a direct question that it caught her off guard. People have been asking her some version of that question for 14 months, and she had been giving the same careful answer the whole time. Fine. Managing. Getting through it. I'm angry, she said. At Vanth. At the situation. At the fact that I have to fight this hard to keep what my husband spent his life building for me. Good, Aldrich said. Angry is useful. Angry pays attention. The formal grading results came back 9 days later, 1 day ahead of schedule. Fumiko called Zelphra on a Wednesday morning while she was sitting in Caspian's study, reading through the last few pages of his restoration binder, a habit she had developed over the past 2 weeks, going back to his notes the way you go back to a letter you have already memorized because the handwriting itself is a comfort. She picked up on the first ring. The grades came back strong, Fumiko said without preamble. The 1907 high-relief wire rim graded MS 64. That's exceptional for a coin of that age and rarity. The 1915 double eagle graded MS 65, which is actually higher than I estimated in your kitchen. The rest of the collection graded consistently well across the board. No surprises. Your husband bought carefully every single time. Zelphra had a notepad in front of her. What does this do to the estimate? It raises it. With certified grades at these levels and with the documentation your husband kept, I spoke to both auction houses Aldrich recommended. They've both seen the photographs and the binder. One of them, Harwick and Sorrell out of New York, wants to schedule a call with you this week. They're very interested. Their specialist on American gold coinage said, and I'm quoting directly here, that the 1907 wire rim alone would generate significant competitive bidding among their existing client base. What's the revised estimate? A brief pause. Harwick and Sorrell's preliminary estimate for the full collection is $2.6 million at conservative bidding. Their specialist believes the 1907 coin could exceed $2 million on its own if the right buyers are in the room. Zelphra set her pen down. She had known the number was coming. She had been living with Fumiko's initial estimate for 9 days, had turned it over in her mind every morning, had said it quietly to herself in the car, and before bed, the way you repeat something you are still not sure you believe. But hearing it revised upward, hearing it confirmed by a second set of experts who had reviewed the documentation independently, made it settle into her bones in a way it had not before. All right, she said. Set up the call. The conversation with Harwick and Sorrell lasted 90 minutes. Their lead specialist, a measured woman named Theodora Bash, walked Zelphra through the auction process in detail. Consignment agreement, insurance during transport, reserve pricing, buyer's premium structure, estimated timeline to sale. Aldrich sat in on the call and asked the questions Zelphra did not know to ask. By the end of it, they had a plan. The collection would be transported to New York underinsured courier within 2 weeks. It would be featured in Harwick and Sorrell's American Numismatic Heritage auction scheduled for 7 weeks out. Reserve prices would be set conservatively to ensure everything sold. And the 1907 wire rim would be the headline lot, given its own dedicated catalog entry, with a full provenance history drawn from Caspian's meticulous documentation. 3 days after the call, Aldrich filed the cease and desist against Broderick Vantha's company. Broderick did not respond directly, but his SUV did not appear in Zelphra's driveway again. The coins left for New York on a Tuesday morning in an unmarked vehicle with 2 representatives from the courier service and a copy of the full documentation binder. Zelphra stood in her driveway and watched the vehicle until it turned off her street. Then she went inside and sat with the smaller sealed envelope Caspian had left her, the one she still had not opened, the one labeled "Read this after you've spoken to someone you trust." She had spoken to Fumiko, to Aldrich, to Theodora Bash. She had people around her now who understood what she had and how to protect it. She was as ready as she was going to be. She opened the envelope. It contained a single page, shorter than the first letter, written in the same careful hand. Zelphra, if you're reading this, you've done it. You found people you trust. You didn't let anyone rush you or pressure you, or take what I built for you. I knew you wouldn't. You were always stronger than you gave yourself credit for, stronger than I told you often enough, and I'm sorry for that. There's one more thing I want you to do. Not with all of it, just some of it. There are other people in Pelwick Hollow who are where you were. Farmers, small business owners, widows, people who worked their whole lives and ended up facing a bank letter with no return. I want you to help some of them. You'll know how. You always knew how to see what people needed before they said it out loud. The rest is yours. Paint the house. Fix the porch. Take that trip to the coast you always talked about and never took. Buy good coffee and drink it slowly and don't feel guilty about any of it. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Every secret I kept for you. Then she picked up her phone and called Rowena Ketch at Pelwick Hollow Savings and Trust. I'd like to come in tomorrow, she said. I'll be paying off the outstanding balances in full. A pause on the other end. All of them. All of them. She arrived at the bank the following morning with a cashier's check drawn from the auction proceeds. The total debt across the car wash lien, the second mortgage, and the outstanding medical bills came to $172,000. She handed the check to Rowena Ketch across the desk without ceremony. Rowena looked at the check for a moment. She had the decency not to say anything other than what needed to be said, which was that the accounts would be cleared and the foreclosure proceedings canceled by end of business that day. On her way out, Zelphra passed Broderick Vanth in the lobby. He was there for something unrelated, standing at the counter with his phone in his hand, and he looked up when she walked by. She recognized her. She could see it in the slight adjustment of his expression, the recalibration. She nodded at him once and walked out into the cold morning air. Spring came late to Pelwick Hollow that year, the way it sometimes does in West Virginia, holding back through most of April before arriving all at once in the first week of May. The dogwoods along Route 9 bloomed overnight, it seemed, and the fields behind Celestine's house went from brown to green in the space of 10 days. Zelphra noticed all of it. She had not noticed much of anything for 14 months, and now she noticed everything. She had spent the weeks after the auction settling the practical side of things. The debts were cleared. The foreclosure proceedings on both properties were canceled. She hired a local contractor to assess the house and fix what needed fixing, starting with the porch, which had developed a soft spot in two of its boards that Caspian would never have let go that long. She had the kitchen repainted a color she had always wanted and never chosen because Caspian preferred the old one. She bought good coffee and drank it slowly every morning at the table by the window, the way he had told her to. She also did not sell the car wash property. That surprised people, Celestine included. The property was cleared of debt now. She could have sold it, walked away, never thought about it again. Instead, she hired the same contractor to assess the building and got a report that was less dire than the exterior suggested. The bones were sound. The roof needed replacing. The bay doors needed work. The concrete needed patching in several places, though she asked him specifically not to touch the area around the drain cover in Bay 2, which she had filled and sealed herself the week after the auction. That spot was staying exactly as it was. What she was going to do with the building, she had not fully decided yet, but she knew she was not done with it. 6 weeks after the auction, she established a fund through Aldrich's office. She called it the Caspian Fund because she could not think of a better name and did not want one. Its purpose was straightforward: to provide emergency financial assistance to residents of Pelwick Hollow and the surrounding county who were facing foreclosure or insurmountable debt from medical bills or failed small businesses. People who had worked their whole lives and ended up with a bank letter and no return. People who were exactly where she had been 14 months ago. She seeded it with $400,000 from the auction proceeds. Aldrich helped her set up the application process. Celestine volunteered to help review cases. Fumiko, who had stayed in loose contact since the auction, offered to consult on any cases involving assets that might be undervalued because, as he put it, Caspian's story was not as rare as people thought. There were other collections sitting in other sheds and attics and vaults across the country, left by people who had planned quietly for decades and never gotten the chance to explain what they had built. The fund helped its first family in June, a couple in their late 60s who had farmed the same land outside Pelwick Hollow for 38 years and were 11 days from losing it to a bank that had run out of patience. The amount they needed to bridge the gap was $23,000. The fund covered it entirely. Zelphra was not there when they got the news. She heard about it secondhand from Celestine, who had been on the phone with the wife and said the woman had cried so hard she could barely speak. Zelphra sat with that for a long time after Celestine told her. She thought about Caspian kneeling on a cold concrete floor, oiling the hinges of a vault door, making sure everything would still work after he was gone. She thought about what it meant to plan for someone else's future when you knew you might not be there to see it. She went out to the car wash that evening. She had been going back regularly, not to the vault, which was sealed, but to the building itself. She would walk the bays, look at the roof, stand in the space, and think. She had started sketching layouts in a notebook she kept in her coat pocket. Nothing formal, just ideas. She wanted to turn it into something. A community space, maybe a place where people could come for help with exactly the kind of thing she had faced: financial counseling, asset review, connections to people like Fumiko and Aldrich who knew how to look at a difficult situation without flinching. She wanted to put a sign above the entrance. She had not decided what it would say yet, but she knew Caspian's name would be on it. She stood in Bay 2 as the evening light came through the gaps in the roof and fell in long strips across the concrete. The drain cover was sealed beneath her feet. The vault was empty now, its contents scattered across private collections and museum cases from New York to California. Each coin documented, each one carrying a piece of the quiet 40-year work of a man who had loved his wife so completely that he had spent 2 decades building her a way out of the worst thing he could imagine. She looked down at the floor. "I found someone to trust," she said quietly. "Several people, actually. You would have liked them." The building was silent around her. Outside, a car passed on Route 9, its headlights sweeping briefly across the buckled bay door. The dogwoods along the road had finished blooming by now, and the petals had blown off and settled into the cracks in the lot, white against gray concrete. Zelphra stood there a little longer. Then she pulled the notebook from her coat pocket, found a fresh page, and began to sketch. She had work to do, real work, the kind that mattered. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she was not dreading it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.